Let's take our Bibles, please, and turn to the Gospel of John, chapter 18. And I trust everybody has the notes. We're going to need the notes this morning. Anybody not have notes? Just put your hand up. Okay. Brother Billy's on the job there. Wonderful. I had thought about putting this up on the screen. I probably should have. We're still trying to get the grips with the logistics because Brother Kirk is going to be showing the video, and I didn't want to mess that up because I'd have to do both. So anyway, we'll probably learn that as we're going forward. But if you do have the notes in front of you, we're going to discuss this. So our lesson this morning is we're going to be looking at the place of Jesus' trial before Pilate. Now, we have been going through our study on archaeology. We've tried to do it chronologically. For the most part, starting in the Old Testament, really we started with Sodom and Gomorrah. We went to Egypt, looking at the pharaohs and so on, and coming right through the Old Testament history, and then into the New Testament history. And we're kind of going to Jerusalem. And right now is really the start of our studies in Jerusalem. We're going to be looking at several studies concerning this important place. And I think it's very important that we, even in our own understanding and our own studies, that we research it. Now, we're living in a time that's it's the best time in the whole history of the world to be a student, because we can actually go to these places online. There are so many videos and maps and practical helps that you can, if you have a computer. If you don't have a computer, you could always go to the library. But there's things that you can bring up and that you can research. And I'm quite visual. I like to see things. I like to understand where things are in relationship to other things, maps and so on. And right now we have a large map of Jerusalem in the time of Jesus. Now, anytime you get these representations, they're not always 100% accurate. Even the maps that Joel will be using this morning here, these are kind of artist renditions in many ways. Jerusalem was completely destroyed in 70 A.D. I was watching a video last night of the Western Wall. If you notice on your map there, that red candy stripe box there, that's the Temple Mount. The Western Wall is right on where it says Barclays Gate, and the bridge there, that's the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall. And right in the southwest corner there, they still have on the blocks and the stones that the Romans pitched over the Temple Mount onto the street below that broke the pavement, and those stones are still there. Of course, it was completely buried in rubble up until recent times. 20, 30, 40 feet of rubble. And of course, when they dug all that out, it exposed all of those things. So it's an amazing time. We can actually go through video and maps and so on and see these places. But we will be looking at Jerusalem in more detail here in the weeks to come. But if you look at your map, it's important, I think, that we try to orientate ourselves. Of course, on the eastern side of the Temple Mount, that's the Kidron Valley. And then to the east of that, you see the Mount of Olives. If you go further east, you'll go down. This is at 2,500 feet above sea level. Then you go down to 1,500 feet below sea level, down into the Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea, of course, right at the top of the Dead Sea. So you have the Kidron Valley. It's mentioned there, you'll see on your map. There's also the Triopian Valley that comes on the western side of the Temple Mount. And then the Hinnom Valley, which is right at the bottom, or the Valley of Gehenna. This is also where the Potter's Field was. I think we did a video on that a while ago as well. You notice the Pool of Siloam at the bottom. You have Hezekiah's Tunnel. That green line is all underground and comes from the Gihon Spring and empties out into the Pool of Siloam. So the eastern side of the city of Jerusalem is important because of the Temple Mount. And the many things that happened there around the temple. Of course, David's city, where it says Ophel there, that's really the city of David. You see there, we did the tomb of David right to the eastern side of that wall there. But today we're actually going to be looking at the western side of Jerusalem. So this grey area where it talks about the upper city, the Essene quarter, This is actually the highest point in Jerusalem. If you go over to the east of the Temple Mount, you'll notice the Garden of Gethsemane where Jesus was arrested. That's in the Kidron Valley, and that's really the lowest point there at Jerusalem. So when Jesus left the upper room, you can see where the upper room is. We're actually going to be looking at that building later on. But that's at the highest point, and then Jesus goes down to the Garden of Gethsemane there on the east. That's the lowest point. And that was really the lowest point in the Lord's experience as he was now facing the cross. But when he was arrested, he was brought back up to, you will see in the Essene quarter, the high priest, Caiaphas' house. And so that's where the council met. And we're going to pick up the reading here in John chapter 18. And he was then taken from the high priest's house there at Caiaphas, probably came out through the Essene gate, because what we're going to be looking at this morning is the Praetorium. We're going to be looking at the place where Jesus, the judgment hall, the place where Jesus was taken before Pilate, and all of the events concerning that right before he went to the cross. And so this all happened, we believe, on the western side. So the high priest there would be on the western side. He'd been taken outside the city gate there at the Essene gate and brought around to the western side of where you will see Herod's palace. Now Herod's palace, it's kind of back to front. Herod's palace would be to the north. You see the three towers there. So Herod's palace would be to the north, and the Praetorium. Now the word Praetorium is a Latin word. You've heard of the Praetorium Guard, and these are the Roman soldiers that would have guarded Pilate. Herod the Great, who built the temple, also built a palace. And where it says Herod's fortress there, that's where and it would have been a very opulent palace. Herod, of course, was a master builder. But when Herod died and his son took over, and he didn't last but about 7 years, he was such trouble that the Romans got rid of the Herod in Judea. Now his brother, Herod Antipas, was situated up in Galilee, but he also had a palace. You'll notice there, right across from Herod's palace. Okay, so that was his father, Herod the Great, would have built all of this. But when the Romans then got rid of Herods in Judea, they sent their own governors, and Pontius Pilate would have been one of those governors who was there, and he would have been in Herod's palace, which is now being controlled by Rome, and the Roman guard would be there. So that was a defensive place, because obviously the Romans were occupiers of Jerusalem and Israel at that time. So it was a defensive place. It was really a secular place. It was a Roman place. It was a defiled place when it comes to the Jewish religion. And so we're going to pick up on some of these details. But what we're going to be looking at this morning in the video is the actual place where Pilate sat and washed his hands, where he brought Jesus before the people. That wasn't actually inside the city. It was outside the city on the western side. So I'm just setting this up for you so that when you see the video, you'll kind of have an idea where we're going with this. Now, in the little inset picture, that's a picture that was taken from the video that corresponds to this little black box here where it talks about Herod's fortress. So you'll see on the left-hand side of this little picture, that would have been the palace. That would have been Herod's palace, which became Pilate's palace. And then to the right of that would have been the Praetorium Guard. That would have been the barracks for the Roman soldiers. And right in the middle, you see the gate complex. Now, this is what he's going to be looking at in the archaeological dig. And it's a very, very interesting thing, because you'll find as we read in John here that several times Pilate goes in and out and in and out. And we're going to discuss why that is, okay? So again, this is just in preparation for the video. But I think there's lots of things in this little map that would be interesting for you to look at and to note. You'll see that Golgotha, there's two places. We're going to be looking at this in a study. There's the traditional place, Golgotha or Calvary. the place of the skull. And you'll see also there the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. And this traditional site was outside the ancient city wall during the time of Jesus. Afterwards, another wall was built and was brought inside the city. And then right to the very north of that, you see Gordon's Calvary and the garden tomb there. And we'll discuss those things and what makes the difference, what we think really would be the accurate site for Golgotha. But that would have been, so it would have all been outside the city wall. He would have been taken from Caiaphas' house out through the Essene gate, marched around to the gate complex on the outside, and then he would have been brought into the hall, the judgment hall, or the praetorium. But then when Jesus would have been delivered to the Jews, then he would have been marched around the outside of the wall to the place called Golgotha. You see where it says Ganath Gate. The word Ganath means garden. Remember, Jesus was crucified in the garden. The tomb was called the garden tomb. And so both Gordon's Calvary and the traditional site of Golgotha would have been in a place of a garden. Interestingly, our problem started in a garden, the Garden of Eden, and our problem was solved in the garden. Anyway, Jesus would have been taken from outside of the judgment hall through this gate complex, delivered to the Jews, and then marched around on the outside of the wall to Golgotha. Let's read these verses before we get into our video. Look at this is John 18 and verse number 28. Then led they Jesus from Caiaphas onto the hall of judgment. Now that word hall of judgment is praetorium. That's what it is in the Greek, and it has to do with the praetorial guard, the Roman soldiers, the Roman barracks, really this palace complex. It would have been all, this whole area, the palace would have been a word to describe this whole area, basically everything in those two black boxes, okay? Onto the hall of judgment, and it was early. So, again, you can get on the internet, and so I'm saying to the internet, what time is sunrise on April 3rd in Jerusalem? And it's 6:25, so it starts getting light about 6 o'clock. Jesus has been up all night, of course. They went from the upper room to Garden of Gethsemane. It was late at night when the soldiers of the high priest, not the Roman soldiers, but the soldiers of the high priest came to get him in the Garden of Gethsemane, brought him back, and all night they would have had this kangaroo court. Early in the morning then he was going to be brought to Pilate. So it was early. He's on the cross at 9 o'clock, so these things probably happened between 6 o'clock in the morning and 9 o'clock when he would be put on the cross. And they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. Of course, that day was the Passover, okay? So it was a holy day. It's ironic, really. They're going to crucify the Son of God, the innocent one, and yet they didn't want to be defiled by going into a secular place. So they went round on the outside of the wall, and they met the guards there at this gate that we're going to look at, and then Jesus would have been brought inside this palace complex, the praetorium, where he would have been dealt with by the Romans and by Pilate. But they didn't want to go in. So they're on the outside of this, because on the inside they would have had all of the idolatrous statues that belonged to Rome, and they didn't want to go into a place and be defiled. So that's why they didn't go in. So you have this gate. This is what we're looking at, the gate on the western side. As they've done the archaeology, there's only one gate on this outside wall. Now, why would Herod, originally who built this, why would Herod want a gate on the outside wall? You notice the city's on the east. Because Herod was, he was so afraid of being trapped. Like Masada was actually his last place of defense. There's other places that Herod had to go to if the Jews revolted against him. And so if the Jews in the city revolted against him, his palace is on the west. And for him to get out of town, he needed a gate on the western side to get out of the city and to get away. That's why that gate was there. And so what we're going to see is you're going to have this in and out of this gate. As you read through the Gospel of John, you'll see this. That Jesus is on the inside, but Pilate runs between Jesus and the Jews on the outside. And so there is this place, it's kind of like a small auditorium, if you will, that's on the outside of the wall. There's an elevated place, which is the place of the pavement, or Gabbatha. Look over at chapter 19 and verse number 13. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus forth, brought him out, and sat down in the judgment seat, that's the bema, in a place that is called the pavement, but in the Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now, Gabbatha in the Hebrew means an elevated place. Now, you're going to see this on the video, that on the outside of the wall, outside the gate, there was some steps, and there's this elevated place, kind of like a platform, and the Jews would gather below, and there would be a seat on this platform, the bema. And so Pilate came out. This is where Pilate brought a bowl of water and washed his hands in the sight of all the Jewish leaders, in the sight of the people. This is the place where they cried out, crucify him, crucify him. This is the place where Pilate basically delivers Jesus over, plus the other two thieves that were then taking that journey, and Jesus carried the cross. But then you remember they engaged Simon of Cyrene, who was coming from the country. So he's on the outside, and they're on the outside of the wall, and they get a hold of Simon, and he carries Jesus' cross to the place called Golgotha. So he's going to be looking at this place called the pavement, the elevated place, Gabbatha, where the judgment seat was, where Pilate would have spoken on the outside of the western wall, speaking to the Jewish people and presenting Jesus. All right, I think at this time we'll go ahead and show the video. Brother Kirk, if you'll help us with that.
This is the old city of Jerusalem. From 1973 to 1978, the old city's western wall was excavated from Jaffa Gate to the southwestern corner where the wall turns east. This excavation was directed by Israeli archaeologist Magen Broshi.
See how those masonry is white, and then right almost when you get to the arrow slot, it turns dark. The soil level before excavations went all the way up to just below that arrow slot. And my professor, Shimon Gibson, he used to put his lunch in that arrow slot when they were doing this dig.
One of the many books that my professor, Dr. Shimon Gibson, wrote is The Final Days of Jesus, the Archaeological Evidence. And in it, he writes, the excavations revealed a monumental gateway with the remains of a large courtyard.
These are walls on either side of the gate, original. You're coming into the gate, You have your steps here. You're walking up the steps. You have the wall, the Ottoman wall. Do you see this patch of preserved wall over here? That's Herodian with the bulges sticking out. That's where the wall line was. We know a gate went in right here because look, you put steps into a wall, you put steps into a gate, and the steps are preserved in this case because they're cut into the bedrock.
This discovered gate led into the palace complex of Herod the Great and is described by the AD 1st century historian Josephus, who wrote of Herod the Great, he built himself a palace in the upper city. Josephus describes the 3 fortification towers Herod built to guard his palace to the north. The foundations of these towers are still visible today, especially the largest one just inside Jaffa Gate. Josephus wrote that adjoining and on the inner side of these towers, which lay to the north of it, was the king's palace, baffling all description. Indeed, in extravagance and equipment, no building surpassed it. The foundation of Herod's palace building have been found through excavations. Josephus also wrote that Herod's palace was entirely walled about to the height of 30 cubits. Notice the fortification walls enclosing the palace building, a royal garden, and another building, the barracks that housed the soldiers. Mark 15:16 says, the soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is, the praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. In his book, Dr. Gibson writes, today, a consensus of opinion exists among scholars that Herod's palace on the west side of the city was the same as the praetorium, and that in its immediate vicinity, Jesus was tried and condemned to death. So in this case, the scholarly consensus is in agreement with the Bible. The Gospel of John also states clearly that for his trial, the Jewish leaders took Jesus to the palace of the Roman governor, meaning in AD 33, when the trial took place, Herod the Great was dead, and so now Herod's palace was the palace of the Roman governor, who was at this time Pontius Pilate. There is an extra biblical source that says the same.
So Philo, you know who Philo is? Philo was born in 25 BC, Jewish philosopher, and he gives a very important quote. He says this. He says, Pilate was one of the emperor's lieutenants, having been appointed governor of Judea. He dedicated some gilt shields in the palace of Herod in the holy city. Okay, so this is a historical source contemporary with Pilate and Jesus, who is connecting Pilate to, where is Pilate's palace? It's the palace of Herod the Great.
So if you were to look at Jerusalem in AD 33 at the time of the trial, then there would be two building complexes that would dominate the city. One, the temple, and the other, the palace. The temple was the focal place for Jewish worship, and the palace was the seat of government, so that the ruler from Rome could rule over the city and all of Judea. So where would we expect, after Herod's death, where would we expect Pontius Pilate to be ruling from when he's in Jerusalem? Definitely the palace. Therefore, when the New Testament says Jesus went to the temple, it means here. Just as when it says Jesus was taken to the palace, it means here. So the question then is, where in this palace complex did the trial take place? So on the western side of the palace complex, we know there was a gate. One of the main reasons Herod the Great would have built this is as an escape route in case the city revolted against him. And there was only one gate that connected the palace complex to the outside of the city. The way that we know this is through archaeology, because that entire western side was excavated in the 70s and only one gate was found. In his book, Shimon describes what they found when excavating the gate area. Gibson writes, "The excavations revealed a monumental gateway with the remains of a large courtyard situated between two fortification walls. On the north side of the courtyard was a rocky outcrop, and on top of it was a small rectangular built platform with steps. Located at the ruins of this gate, a reconstruction of the gate from Dr. Gibson's book is shown on a sign, which we based our own reconstructions on. The monumental gateway consisted of an outer and inner gate. The remains of a large courtyard made from stone pavements was made of a lower and upper floor connected by stairs."
Why don't you see stone pavement here today? Well, because that's the problem with archaeology. Archaeology is also, it's self-destructive. And so when you find a floor, in this case a stone pavement floor, then what archaeologists tend to do is rip it up and look for coins underneath it, because that dates when that floor was put in. But there's still just a few of those stone pavements that are still in situ in their original position. You ready? Here they are. You see that stone pavement? Okay, so that stone pavement went out across here.
On the upper stone pavement was a small rectangular built platform with steps. In Greek, this is called a bema, which is translated judgment seat. From here, Herod, and then later Pontius Pilate, could address a crowd of people.
As you're coming up here, they found these steps. Oh my gosh. It's gone. Oh man. The bema stone is gone. Wow. There was a bema stone that they found that was right here. Maybe that's it. Yeah, that's it. So somebody pushed it over. Do you see how that rock is carved right there? That's it. It was sitting up here. Over the last 2 years, somebody pushed it down. Looks like it broke off the side of it too. That's a crying shame, because that is part of the preservation of the bema.
So whenever something is found in archaeology, it needs to be interpreted. What is it? What does it mean? And the best tool to use for interpreting archaeology are ancient texts. And the ancient text that was used in this excavation to interpret these finds was the Gospel of John. In his book, Gibson writes, "These finds also fit very well the description in the Gospel of John regarding the place of the trial of Jesus." There's a lot of description in the Gospel of John that they're going in and out. Pilate's going in and out. He's bringing Jesus in and out. So there has to be a gate. And in the excavations, they found this gate complex. The place is called in the Gospel of John the stone pavement. And what did they find in the excavations? A stone pavement. Pilate sits down on a judgment seat, which they found through archaeology. They found the judgment seat.
But this is where Pontius Pilate would speak to the people, where he would sit on his judgment seat.
So this fitting between the Gospel of John and what was found in the excavations that he took part in is why Dr. Gibson interprets this place as being biblical Gabbatha. So if you want to learn more about how the Bible fits with the archaeology of Jesus, I recommend my book, Where God Came Down, the Archaeological Evidence. I'm a very visual person, so it's a very visual book, and I'll leave a link in the description below where you can order that. So the reason that this site is not better known is that the director of these excavations back in the 70s, McMinnville, never published the excavations. Dr. Broshi has now passed away, and so my professor, Shimon Gibson, has inherited the responsibility of publishing these excavations. And as one of his students, I've worked for many years on the material that comes from this gate complex and other places. And I can tell you that it's still going to be a long time until this is published, because the amount of material coming from this excavation is overwhelming.
These are stone vessels also from that period of time.
Wow.
And boxes, and bags, and boxes, and it just goes on and on. All the way up here. So much work.
Yeah.
So before we go in and read the details about the trial, we need to understand something in general. When the Bible talks about the palace, it's talking about anywhere within that palace complex. The same is true for the temple. When we read that Jesus and the apostles went to the temple, it does not mean that they went into the temple building itself. And the same is true for the palace. When it says that Jesus was brought to the palace for his trial, it could mean anywhere within the whole palace complex. When you entered into that western gate, you were inside the palace. And when you exited that western gate, you were outside the palace.
Now come on up and we'll read the story, because that's, of course, what brings it all to life.
The Gospel of John says, "The Jewish leaders took Jesus to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace, because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover." Now Josephus informs us that the palace complex was filled with brazen statues. And this only makes sense because the palace was the Roman stronghold of the city, and Roman places had the statues of their gods and their goddesses. And so this is why the Jews don't want to go in to anywhere inside the palace complex, or it would make them unclean. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" Pilate then went back inside the palace to ask Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" They have a discussion, and then Pilate went out again to the Jews and said, "I find no basis for a charge against him." He went back in the palace, where Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe. So the question then is, where is the most likely place in the palace complex where the flogging of Jesus took place by the Roman soldiers? The barracks for housing the soldiers was located at the southern end of the palace complex near the western gate. Until recently, this area was covered by a massive pile of earth. To get the next shot, I stood on the wall facing west. This shows that the pile of earth has now been removed and is now a large parking lot. The western gate entered the palace here, and when the pile of earth was removed, an archaeological square was left behind from the salvage dig here. I was leading a group when I saw this for the first time.
Amazing this.
Oh, wow.
So what is this about here?
Wow. I will explain when everybody gets here.
So you haven't seen this?
No, I've never seen this.
Me neither.
This is, there was a gigantic mound of dirt, and the whole mound of dirt is gone, and so I jumped up on a bench and looked over and saw this. We are inside of Herod the Great's palace complex, and that is the floor of some building that was in that complex. Now I can tell by looking at I almost went to visit it down there. I can tell by looking at the tesserae, these little cubes, that this is the Roman period. We're looking at the time of Jesus right there. And we're looking at it in a place that we know Jesus went through this particular event where he was flogged by the Roman soldiers.
So it makes sense. It's the most probable place where the flogging of Jesus took place would be inside the gate and near the barracks where the soldiers lived, since it was the soldiers that flogged him. And so I'm not saying that it took place right where we saw that mosaic floor, but somewhere in the vicinity of these barracks is the likely place where the flogging of Jesus took place. And so these mosaics are critically important. They connect to the event of Jesus being flogged by the Roman soldiers, and yet they're a parking lot today. I mean, as an archaeologist, that's pretty depressing. After the flogging, John's gospel continues. Once more, Pilate came out, and this time, Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify! Crucify!" bringing the charge that Jesus claimed to be the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, he went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. Then Pilate goes back out, where he is told of Jesus that anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the stone pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. With all this going in and out, there has to be a gate. Why not the gate complex that is found in the 1970s through archaeology, where they also uncovered a stone pavement and a judgment seat? John 19:16 says, "Finally Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified." And then what happens next, as recorded in the Gospel of Luke, is what absolutely convinced me that this place was Gabbatha. Luke 23:26 says, "As the soldiers led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus." So Luke says, as they led Jesus away, where were they leading Jesus away from? Gabbatha, from the stone pavement, the place of the trial. And so then it says that Simon of Cyrene is coming in from the open country. Okay, there's only one gate for the palace complex that connected the palace to the open country, and that's this western gate. Surely there was an eastern gate, but that connected the palace to the city. Simon of Cyrene couldn't have been coming in from the country, approaching that eastern gate. The western gate, we know that there's only one. We know this from the archaeology because the entire western side of the palace complex was excavated and only one gate was found. And so this is the gate for the palace complex that would allow for Simon of Cyrene to come in from the open country and then be given the cross of Jesus to carry. Okay, so we have to deal with the problem of why people aren't brought to this gate and shown this place. They're taken to another place on the eastern side of the city, and they're shown the remains, archaeological remains of another gate over there. So in order to understand how this happened, we need to follow the history of Jerusalem. In AD 70, the city of Jerusalem was massively destroyed by the Romans, and this is when that western gate was also destroyed. It was sealed off under the rubble of the destroyed wall and fortifications that were near it. So it's sealed off. About 100 years later, the Roman Emperor Hadrian comes and rebuilds the city, calling it Aelia Capitolina. In Hadrian's city, he built an eastern gate. And it's the remains from this gate that is seen and that people are taken to today. And so now it's known with certainty that this gate that people are shown dates to the time of Hadrian. And so it is in the wrong place and it is from the wrong time. The gate that dates to the right time and is in the right place is the western gate, which of course remained sealed under the rubble and destruction of Jerusalem until it was finally discovered through excavations in the 1970s.
Again, another amazing place that nobody comes to. And yet, of course, it's not about the Jews crucifying Jesus, and it's not about the Romans crucifying Jesus. It's about all of us who crucified Jesus, right? Because we're all fallen short of the glory of God. We're all sinners in need of the forgiveness and the atonement of the blood of Jesus. He wasn't crucified against his will, against God's will. He surrendered himself to that kind of punishment, to take our punishment on himself so that we could receive what we don't deserve, and that is his grace.
It's this match between the archaeology and the Gospel of John that really convinces me that this is Gabbatha, the place where Jesus was tried by Pilate. If you found value in this video, please like it. It helps it get out to other people so that they can also see this information. You also may be interested in watching this other video where I explore direct archaeological evidence for Jesus of Nazareth.
When we were there in Jerusalem several years ago, we got to do a tour of the city walls, and we actually walked around. There's a path on top of the city wall of Jerusalem. We got to walk around that. And one of the things that shocked me was we actually walked, and I didn't even know, I wish I'd have known this when I was there, walked right past it. Nobody said a thing about that. But what I did notice was when he was talking about the pile of dirt, that's, Jerusalem is divided into four. There's the Jewish quarter, the Muslim quarter, the Christian quarter, and the Armenian quarter. And that is in the Armenian quarter. And when I looked over the wall into the city, it wasn't just dirt, it was piles of rubble everywhere. And it shocked me, I couldn't believe it. You may have heard me mention this maybe many years ago when I came back, because the most wonderful, the holy city of Jerusalem, and yet it was like a dumping ground in this Armenian quarter. Well, that's when, the aerial shot that he had was all grass and greenery. I guess they cleaned it up a little bit, but then of course they had cleared all of that out, and that's a parking lot, and now they did the archaeological dig. And again, like he said, it's a parking lot, and I mean, this is if they could dig that whole thing out, and they would actually find the pavements of the Praetorian Guard, the barracks, probably Herod's palace. It's all there. That was the thing that amazed me when I was there. Like when we went to the Pool of Siloam, and they just recently uncovered like a few steps in the corner, and the rest was just overgrown dirt. And I'm thinking to myself, what's keeping you? Why don't you just get in here and uncover? And of course, they just did the archaeological dig on the Pool of Siloam in the last year, 2 years, and it's amazing what they have found there. So it's absolutely fascinating, the city of Jerusalem especially, with all of that history there, and they're still uncovering things today. So